Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this edition of The Librarian Speaks. I am Matthew Carey, the designated extrovert of the Carter Johnson Librarian Collection, and we are here this evening with a very special Librarian Speaks because I have asked some of you fine folks to read your favorite passages from Mom's book, To Love, to Obey, to Serve. And there is a reason we're doing this evening. If you guys could all get your reactions ready. How many of you have tried to purchase a copy of this book? How many of you have not been able to find a reasonably priced copy of this book?
Reasonable being the operative word.
Operative word, I was about to say.
That is because they are out of print and we haven't been able to get Mama coordinated enough to get them going until now. So this special Librarian Speaks is to announce that To Love, to Obey, to Serve is about a week or two from being available to all of you for purchase.
Yay!
I am going to share screen real quick. And
now,
we have...
This is the stopgap. For good or ill, my next generation discovered, like so many do, what was in my closet. And went through a lot of my old pictures, certificates, and they found the original journal, which is part of what we're going to be talking about tonight. So until my next generation, which will be about a year and a half in the future, gets together with a, God help me, coffee table size, complete with interviews with at least one of the women that I have loved, giving some of those entries from her perspective. God help me. This one will have to do.
So what this one is a cleaned up reprint. So everything that's in this one, the original, is in this one,
except for pictures.
With less typos and different pictures.
The pictures have been lost to time currently, so we had to fake it, but we did find pictures from what appears to be the same rolls.
She has pictures around. It's just a question of finding them because I was part of the whole dig out from underneath the bed kind of thing. Boxes and boxes and boxes of them. It's just a matter of finding the file that we put them into. But once we've done that, we'll be able to rock and roll and add some of those pictures back in.
Yeah. So this is making the book available again. So probably 2 weeks, we have a
proof coming right now. And that can take 2 to 4 weeks. We're hoping for 2 rather than 4, and we ordered it about a week ago.
So that is coming.
We'll get to see Mom blush as everybody's reading the book.
If you want to see Mom blush, watch the walkthrough video that I listed just a moment ago. When we're leaving the center, I noticed the picture that Mama was looking at, which is going to be in the new book. And I stop and ask her what it is, and you can watch her blush and get flustered. I love it. I crack up every time I watch the video.
My misspent youth and trying to edit out some old pictures. That's what I get for leaving it on my computer. Me bad. All right.
But Mama, history is history. You can't edit it.
That's right.
No, but you can hide it on the
Okay, you can't hide it because I have access to all your computers.
Actually, the one I need to really worry about are Pulse and CC.
No, you don't, because I have access to photo layout books that I can print on demand.
This is what she's worried about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I could have a book up like a week from now. Just
all right.
This is the third book of the journal that not a lot of people know about.
All right.
This is what we're going to, yeah.
That part.
Yeah, all of it.
3.
All of it. Okay. Well, I am going to add a spotlight here, and our first person to relay their favorite entry. Sally, are you ready to go? Look at the anticipation on Mama's face. She's been dying for this since I brought it up.
Actually, before Shally starts, by way of explanation, I have had a lot of questions over the years since I allowed my journal to be published. Please understand, I didn't write a book. I kept a journal, as was actually quite common with slaves of my era. I was ordered to keep it, which is how it started. Ultimately, it became my Pandora's box in reverse. Pandora let things out of the box. I put things into it. It was where most of my emotions went, because again, the slaves of my era were not expected to, quote, inflict, close quote, their emotions on their owners. It didn't mean we didn't have them. It meant that we had to express them in ways that didn't impose on our owners. So we kept journals. Journal writing has been done for thousands of years. We learned about the Civil War from the journals of soldiers. We learned about the Victorian era the same way. And I kept a journal. Only a few, much to my surprise, have seen the original. And this, by the way, is one of 3 binders this thick that is the original. For the longest time, the journals traveled with me when the library traveled. Nobody ever noticed them until Pulse found them one day, and then I lost them for the entire weekend.
I was under the table.
My journal was where I put my emotions. When I allowed the journal to be published by Mystic Rose Press, my bet was that they would lose their shirts, because I wouldn't read it and I wrote it. I don't particularly like journals or diaries, mostly because the incidents are unique to the writer and the few people who might have lived that incident with them. Philip and Molly told me that I was wrong, and that while the experiences may have been unique to me, the emotions were universal. And I thought that was the funniest thing I had ever heard. The original journal hit publication in '99. And since then, I have gotten pretty close to 1,000 letters about it, including, when are you going to do it as an audiobook? And as many times as I've thought about it, I'm actually far too close to it. But I have always wondered what it was that everyone else who read it got, thought, experienced. And so tonight, you all get to fulfill a fantasy for me, because I'm going to hear my experiences through someone else's filters. And that's never happened to me before. So before Shall even starts, thank you.
I told y'all it was a special request.
So I jumped on this as soon as I saw it because I wanted to make sure I got this particular section and nobody else got to it first. I found this book when I was with my very first owner. You know, I've been through a few. But I read this entry and I had to go ask for permission to orgasm because it was that damn hot. Oh, I'm sorry, Mom. Should I have waited till you weren't drinking?
Yeah, but now we have that spit take recorded. It'll be great. That's going to be a GIF.
I too keep a journal, but highly sporadically, and I have since I found the lifestyle and even some before. And When Mama found that out, she asked me when my book would be ready. And at this point, I'm thinking probably by the end of 2024, because I am self-editing it. And oh my God, the things I don't want to share.
Worst thing you can do.
Yeah. At this point, I'm getting very close to typing it up and handing it off to somebody, mostly typing it up so they don't have to try and figure out the handwriting. I don't handwrite things that others are supposed to read. So 9:27. Yes.
You know I do editing, right? Okay, let's
My
talk after.
girlfriend is editing and I didn't know.
Later. Sorry, please, sir.
Well, I guess I just found myself an editor. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm a former editor, so you know, you have choices.
Okay, maybe
right,
I'll give sections to each of you. That way nobody knows the whole of it until the end.
There you go. All right, let's let Sally read her section, please.
So, Friday, I kneel before you. The rough-hewn wood is foreign to my knees, as is the room in which I kneel. A man I do not know seizes my breasts, placing them between the separated boards of a studded press. He tightens down, aware of, but ignoring my wince. You look on. His calloused hands continue to tighten the abusive device until he wrenches an agonizing moan from my lips. He stops, checks his handiwork, and looks to you. You okay his work with a passive approval. He reaches into a tall jar filled with red liquid. From it, he pulls a handful of long, thin shafts. In spite of my pain, I look in morbid fascination. He picks one up to show you. The shaft is long, maybe 18 inches. There's a lead weight at one end and a razor-sharp tip at the other. I do not have long to wait before I find out what they are for. He picks one up, applies an antiseptic to the pointed end, and drops it skillfully into one of the holes in the top of the press. I had not noticed these holes before. I bite my lip hard to muffle the cry I want to make as this pointed missile invades my tender flesh. The processor is repeated again and again. Soon, there is no need to hide the pain. It is amusing to you. Besides, I can no longer endure the invading needles in silence. All too quickly, the many tipped holes are filled with steeled shafts. Each has pierced my skin, causing its own little hell. The man defers to you. Until now, you have watched your toy with detached amusement. Now it's your turn to play. You tap, slap, and swat at the needles playfully, delighted at the dance of pain I do before you. I feel like a Hindu fakir in a miniature Kavandi, doing my own dance of pain and sacrifice before the altar of the gods. When the game bores you, you toss out a new challenge. You offer me the kiss I've always dreamed of receiving from you, but I must come to you to get it. To do this, I must allow your upper body to rest its weight for the length of the kiss on the needles that separate us. I try. The pain is unbearable. I must back away. Without a word, you invite me to try again. Again, I try. This time I come closer, but again, the indescribable pain stops me. On the third try, my lips touch yours, and the soul-wrenching agony is replaced by the exhilaration of your kiss. As I lose myself in you, the intensity of the pain increases. I can feel droplets of my own blood running down my breasts. The heady mixture is an ambrosia of unfathomable intensity. It was a small price to pay for the thrill of your kiss.
Thank you, Sally, for a very nice reading. and for picking one.
We were in northern San Francisco. Actually, we were just north of San Francisco at a private couples club playground of about 70 acres, maybe 75. And the old Leatherman who owned it had a lot of antique toys. Some of them were not exactly toys, including shackles that had come off 2 different slave ships. The needles went almost all the way through.
I know when I first read it, what resonated the most with me was the level of intensity of trust that slaves give their owners. And that the amount we agree to in that simple surrender of ourselves to others, that I had never fully been able to put into words of my own until I read that chapter where you're loaned out to a stranger. And yeah, it gave me goosebumps. It still does every time I read it. It's one of the ones I have bookmarked.
You can tell by watching you, just talking about it. Yeah. So Mama, we need the context of the time, which you just kind of gave us a little bit. And what you think about it looking back on it now.
The kiss was worth it. The cleanup was interesting. And I learned a lot about me and needles, actually. They were closer to define as skewers. So they interfered with some of the nerves of the breast. But when trying to duplicate that and to begin to be on the receiving end of more needle play, I realized unless they were much larger, I couldn't. Small needles and my nervous system don't actually work well together. They act almost like a completed electrical circuit. In my misspent youth, if I had to do it again, especially with certain people, yeah, I would.
Zoe, does that work?
Most certainly.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Mama.
All right. Let me
I
take
haven't thought about that in decades.
All right. I know I have one more. Moving around. Shy, are you still here?
Yep, I'm here.
There you are. I had to find you. You had to
Yeah.
move.
I'm here. You want me to read?
Please.
I have lots of little tabs in here. Okay. This is 724. In the last 5 days, I've learned a lot. Most importantly, I've learned that not all tops are like Catherine. Is it Pi or Pia?
Yeah.
Pia knew I was speeding. 2 of the 5 nights I was there, she forced me to sleep. She said she was surprised Catherine never noticed and made me rest. Last night, I had this really strange dream. Somewhere in my fantasy, I found the perfect dominant, beautiful, brilliant, good, conversationalist, not afraid of my intellect or talents, but comfortable enough within herself to enjoy them and focus them to her advantage. someone who was willing to teach me to be what she wants me to be, not someone who expects me to have all the answers to my problems and hers. She will be someone strong enough to control me, not me control her, capable enough to reach inside me and take out the good and mold it into the slave I'm capable of being. She will love me, cherish me, and be as proud of having me sit at her feet as I will be sitting there. She was even well off enough not to have me funding her existence. Instead, I would just contribute to it so I wouldn't cost her a lot. I want this fantasy to become reality so badly, I would cry. And that makes me cry. Sorry.
There is so much to unpack in that. As we're reprinting, there are some names that I can now use because I have permission. The peer was a woman named Monique Van Cleef. She was grandmother to my house. The woman that I was serving, who is the one that Jill often tells stories about, putting a bow around my neck, putting a note between my teeth and telling me to deliver the note. We had been, ultimately, Jill and I ended up buying a house with, I think in the book, it gets challenging because my mind remembers the original names and I have to remember what they were changed to. We bought a house together with Catherine. Beautiful place, 2 separate apartments plus a 3rd floor that my slave brother and I turned into a rather large play space, and the basement that we turned into a full dungeon, as well as the fact that each of the women, Jill had her own play space in our apartment and Catherine had one in hers. Catherine was a brilliant woman. But there are pluses and minuses. Now, please remember, I'm talking about the era when I was a kingling. We're going back this entry into probably, I think, 82, give or take. And the times were different. And I remind people of that. What slaves were expected to do was to love, to obey, and to serve, period. Once I accepted the collar, that's what I did. The more Catherine had a slave rather than submissives and weekend players and occasionally clients, because she was also a pro dom, the more she realized that there were a lot of things she didn't have to do any longer, which is part of what slaves were for. The bad part was, in her particular instance, a brilliant mind became taken up with more and more drugs, until the drugs got in the way of everything, not just me. The running of the house, her clients, articles that had to be written, photo shoots that had to be done, the real world, etc., all got messed up in this. Now that, believe it or not, is the preface for this. Baroness Monique Van Cleef, and those who don't know who she was in this tribe's history should probably look her up, was coming back into the country after having been gone for about at that point, probably 15 or 16 years, back to her home country, which was Amsterdam. One of the slaves that she had when she was in the United States in the 60s was now serving my owner. And when Monique was coming back into the country, he said, I'll introduce you. Catherine decided to have a party for the Baroness. Some of that is in the journal. That party went from something simple to something that I can't say got out of hand, because anyone who was looking at it from the outside didn't know that. A 50-person guest list ended up at 341 people in the house that night. A police escort, hot and cold running TV maids, food, embassy protection, because she was a baroness by right, not by adoption of the name. So there was security from the Dutch embassy there. There were limousines that I had to have parking boys parking. And when word got out that the Baroness was coming back into the country, that little party 450 escalated, as I had said. Everybody and their brother wanted to be there. Some of the photos from that party, and I think I've got about 30 of them left. And the guest list read like a small who's who of kink then, reads like a major who's who of kink now. But as things kept growing and lists of things to do kept growing, the only thing that didn't grow was time or volunteers to do this. Some of that is outlined in the diary. Literally, my brother and I rebuilt the house. 2 dungeons had to be finished. A playroom had to be finished. A front porch had to be rebuilt. Back stairs had to be completely redone. Artwork had to be done. Food had to be ordered. Champagne had to be running, and I could keep going with this. I had 24 hours in a day. Not a lot of time to finish this. And since I'm playing True Confession and what the hell, another of Anne's clients, whose name I can't remember what got changed to, happened to have been one of the largest cocaine dealers on the East Coast. And he said, you're never going to get this done. And I said, I have to. Failure was not an option. He said, I can help you with this only if you will do it my way. You need time. I can stop your body from sleeping. Here is what I'm about to give you. Here is the measurement. You will never do more and you will never do less. So every 35 minutes, I had a very, 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 very small dose of cocaine. I could stay awake for 5.5 days before my body said, fuck you. You are keeling over. I slept for 24 hours, got up and did it all over again. The party, however, went off without a hitch. Monique was our guest for the week after the party because they were finishing her penthouse in New York. The Baroness saw something that Catherine never noticed, which was that I never slept and that I was on cocaine. She couldn't figure out why Catherine hadn't figured that out. Did I mention failure was not an option?
Yes, you did.
And all I could think of was something will happen or I will die. And at that point, I really didn't care as long as I didn't fail. Monique's way of dealing with it was to tell Anne that she needed help setting up the new apartment.
Okay.
spectacular, Catherine, spectacular penthouse in New York City. So, okay, off I go, report for duty, expecting lots and lots of boxes. The apartment was entirely finished, and I couldn't figure out what I was there for. She sat me down, we had dinner. While I was at the dinner table, one of her slaves went under the table and attached a shackle to my leg. He then proceeded to keep pulling until I had to stand up. It was about 50 feet of chain. He attached the other end to the bed in the guest room. There was more than enough chain to get me to the bathroom. And she said, "This is where you're staying for the next 7 days. The other servants in this house will bring you anything you need. You are going to sleep." And I crashed. I slept probably for the first 2.5 to 3 days. And then she gave me paper and pencil, and of course the televisions of that day were huge. And I had anything that I needed. The thing that I needed most was a bed. And that entry was from a daydream during that time.
That's amazing. Shy, any thoughts?
Well, part of what happened on through there with your relationship with Catherine just really spoke to me, because we do get a lot of slaves and submissive types that go, you know, they want this and they want that, but we don't have dominance to provide for them. Dominance that actually know how to care and educate their slave to be what they want them to be. And there you were, and you were actually pretty new, it appeared, and you would get a little taste of the other side of it, how different other dominants were compared to what you were in. And I could see that you could see that. I felt like, I don't know how you felt, I felt like you were being taken advantage of in some of those instances, how they just kept piling on and expecting you to do and do and do, but they weren't really taking care of your well-being.
You are looking at that through modern eyes. I need to back you up to the 70s when
Yeah, it's different.
I accepted my collar. There's a reason this book has a warning. Don't try this at home, boys and girls.
Yeah.
The era in which I came out is very, very different. We were expected to love, to obey, and to serve, and to fly on blind trust. When it worked, there is no drug that can match the exhilaration. Nothing. When it doesn't work, it's a crash and burn that I am grateful you will never know. You have something that was unheard of in my era, a safe word. You also have the right to say no. Or to, as I hear so often, take care of the property and so on. Those things weren't in my era. There are a lot of other of my crazed adventures in there. Some very, very good. Some, what the hell were you thinking? But that was the life of a slave of my era. including the fact that I was in the will of two of my owners, and I could have been bought, sold, or traded.
Mhm.
That, well, there are a couple of things, as I had once told Matt, there are a couple of things that I could still go to jail for, and it's been 40 years. As well as surviving an attempted kidnapping and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
Would this be a good time to mention that shortly after the era you're talking about is when safe, sane, and consensual became a thing?
Actually, it was a little later than that.
And are the two related?
No, and it was actually about a decade after that. But the tribe was changing. The life of a full-time slave who is not also bound by the collar of marriage, because the wedding ring is its own kind of color. And again, of my era, when I said I do, I did. And the trust was in the leash of the relationship. And I use the word leash because Jill has always said the leash attached to my collar is also attached to her wrist. And the relationship is what's between us. Now, as to why Jill didn't see it, Jill worked a corporate job. And when she was home, I worked very, very hard to make sure she didn't see. Because for her to rescue me was in and of itself a sign of failure. The person she trusted with me was the one who had violated her trust and therefore mine.
And now the context of looking at it, that entry today. I think you pretty much just kind of touched on it.
Matt, that one's hard. Because even at this point, almost 40 years, Jesus Christ, almost 40 years later, because I am the product of the era that I grew up in, would I change anything? Probably not.
But what would you suggest others do?
I was just going to say, what if you just read somebody's current journal and that was the entry? What would you?
If this was current, if this was something that had happened, if this was an incident of the last 5 to 7 years, I would be sitting down with my junior, since now I'm in the position of senior, which is still weird. I would be sitting down with my junior and going, we need to talk. And then I would be sitting down with another dominant master/owner, since the three words are not necessarily the same thing. And going, I have a situation, without revealing names. I can handle this, or you can handle this, or we can handle this. Because now there are avenues out for slaves, some of which are fairly well kept. There is a slave rescue network. It is nowhere near as active as it used to be, but it does still exist. If this had gone on in the last 5 years, it would be finding out whether or not my sibling felt trapped, and trapped to the point where they were afraid to get out. Because if you're afraid to get out, I can fix that. Because I'll make this simple. You're just not going home. Whatever personal artifacts you have there, someone else will pick up, believe me. You're just not going home. And then I would call the network and go, look, I need some money or I need some clothing. And they would stay with me for up to 30 days until they were passed on to the next person in the chain.
Looks like Nice Kitty has their hand up.
Can I jump in real quick and add something to what Mom was talking about?
Sure.
You've read it, you're cheating.
No, ma'am. I'm just going to chime in on what you were talking about. I'm going to leave out the part where you saved me from leaving because of my dominance. I'm going to skip over that part. But we had a situation, I don't know how many people know about Black Beat, but we had a situation where a dominant was abusing their subordinates, their subs, their slaves, whatever, and getting away with it. And did it continually until he hit the right slave and she said, no, no more. And she sought out people to help her. That dominant is now in jail.
Good.
So it does work when the abuse is that palpable.
Right.
You just got to catch the ones that that keep hiding it, that keep going back to that pool, that keep, denying. Okay, that was it.
Thank you, Pulse. Nice Kitty, go ahead.
Mama Vi, thank you so much for this. I enjoy your presence at all times. But my question is, in your choices for what you've done and choosing this lifestyle, which you don't choose it chooses you, I think.
You're
Where
breaking up.
do you live? I'm in remote Alaska. I don't have good signal. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're going in and out.
Compromise, to sum it down. Where do you stand on compromise?
It's a wonderful place when both parties agree. It is part of the more modern relationship. And compromise is actually what makes life go around. It's good for both parties because in sitting down to try to create the compromise, each sees it to some extent from the other's perspective. The old Indian saying about you can't judge a man until you've walked a mile in his moccasins. Compromise allows that to happen. And in modern relationships, and for me, modern means the last 15 to 20 years, compromise goes along with safe, sane, and consensual.
Thank you, Nice
Can
Kitty.
I expand just a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. So you had just said that there was nothing that you would change. I love that, right? In that, where did you compromise? Where did you make your compromises? And where did you just hold fast to what you wanted in order to get what you wanted? Like where were your barriers that you compromised, and what barriers did you stand just to get to have the life that you wanted to lead?
That actually requires thought because compromise wasn't in my vocabulary. Obedience, service. You notice I didn't say submission. Most of the slaves of my era were dominant. We made a conscious choice to serve. Submission for us literally was a vacation because it meant we did not have to think. So being submissive for the night, I could turn my brain off and not have to worry about anything except absolute obedience. And that's hard to explain now because you don't really have a point of reference for it. Explanation. If I were in service to you, I would already know your habits, the people in your life, your likes, your dislikes, who you want to talk to, who you don't. I can be looking dead at you with a phone in my hand and say, I'm sorry, she's not here. Because I'm expected to be able to maneuver through that world. I'm expected to have anticipated your needs. Lori in the marketplace calls it anticipatory service. Submission. To bend your will to the will of another. So if you're going out to dinner and you tell me to wash the dishes in the kitchen, I will keep washing those dishes over and over and over again until you get back. Because that's what you told me to do. Now in slave mode, I've washed the dishes. You're not going to be back for 3 hours. I'm probably going to clean out the cabinet, rearrange a few things, make sure the kitchen is clean, and then clean out the refrigerator, dump some old food, and redo a menu. But in submission, I only have to do what I'm told. There are 6 dishes in the sink. 3 hours later, I will be washing the same 6 dishes. That was luxury for us. But obedience, service. That was the expectation. In return, what the leash was trust. The understanding that you would build me better. Create new things within me. Now, what did I give up? That's kind of hard to say because when you accept the collar in my era, you walked into a new life. Some little things were automatic unless my owner turned them off. For instance, when my voice was in much better shape, I used to sing professionally. So singing around the house was not unusual for me. Now, had someone said cease, I would have had to think about it because the music was natural. But you simply walk into a new life. The first or second time I was with Catherine, she asked the question of, what do you bring to this table? Now, she had been dealing with weekenders and a lot of, those who would pay a dominant for a scene. So she asked me to make a list, and I did. And she sat there and she read it, and the look went across her face, and I thought, shit, I'm in trouble. And she put it down and said, I've never seen anything like this. And I'm going, I've dishonored Jill. What the fuck did I do? And she said, this isn't what I expected. And I get, yes, ma'am, I'm sorry, whatever it is, I'll fix it. And she said, no, I just never expected the skill set. Well, I was a teacher. I've been a bodyguard. I have driven ambassadors' wives. I have driving skills. I have editing skills. I have written for, small magazines and things like that. Those are skills that I bring with me. And she said, but I expected you to want me to rise in leather. I said, that's not realistic. But All of those things are a part of me. Now, some of those skills she used, some she didn't. She liked having me singing around the house. She thought it was wonderful and used to hand me a request list. Either I knew it or I had to learn it. But that is the life, or was the life, of a slave. So compromise, it wasn't in the vocabulary. It was do what I request of you, anticipate your service, or the only time disobedience was allowed was in the case of life or jeopardy of my owner. And a couple of times that had to be exercised.
Can I add something as well?
Sure.
Okay, so I think your era was so much easier than today. Today there's so much happening. Oh, I know, Mama Vi. I've been in
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I've been in the lifestyle 22 years and I still haven't met my master. You know, because I don't want to just superficially play. You know, I've been in service to my community, you know, for the last 22 years, but it's like I'm starting to want to date and maybe seek something more. At 54, I have to try, right? And I just don't know where the compromise lies. Do I compromise this monkey that I've opened of, you know, my slave heart and just date vanilla because I can't, you know, it's like, it's so hard.
It is a different world now. I don't know, a friend of mine from high school who found me online and asked me about 50 Shades of Grey and how would she find the man who would want to do this because her husband didn't. I said, pick up a copy of 50 Shades of Grey and carry it with you to your next dinner appointment. If somebody asks you about it, start a conversation. Took about 12 tries. She found out that her husband's brother-in-law, one of the men in her extended family, was as twisted as an old pubic hair and would wind her up and send her right back to her husband, so aroused that maybe she wasn't a classified nymphomaniac, but pretty damn close. Is someone out there who is worthy of you? Yes. You don't want to accept any rock. You're looking for pearl. You'll find it.
Peg, welcome. Good to see you again. Wants to know if, was it willingly or willfully done to submit?
Willingly. Eagerly. Lovingly. Hi, I can turn off my brain. Yes.
All right. Well, I have one.
You reading? Cool.
I have one, and I have a particular reason for it.
Uh-oh.
But it's one of my favorites. So this is from 7/25/1988, a Monday. Shit, we're moving to Tulsa.
Okay.
That one interests me because the first, up until this point, I believe, is all New York.
Actually, at that point, we're in LA.
Okay. But
From
it's
big city to big city.
big city, Tulsa. So we've been, everything that we've just talked about, the penthouses, the parties, the formalities, the niceties, to LA, to Tulsa. And I want to hear about that one. Shit, we're moving to Tulsa.
Backstory, because there's always one. Jill and I grew up in Jersey. We're both Jersey girls. And got together. I was in graduate school, Jill was in college. And once we fell in love, Jill was working in New Jersey, and the company that she was working for wanted to transfer her to Los Angeles. Okay, so we made our first corporate move. And then because she happened to have been very good at her job, the company that she was working for was going to be opening a new plant in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, they had offered her 2 different promotions, one of which was to Neenah, Wisconsin. Jill and I talked about it, and I said, honey, you wear a sweater until it's 80 outside. You want to go to a place that has 10 months of winter, 2 weeks of spring, 3 weeks of summer, and a week of fall? That also at the time redefined the term white bread. Can we talk about this? She thought about it and went, okay, you're right. So she very lovingly and sweetly turned down Neenah. About 4 months after that, up came the opportunity to be part of a startup from groundbreaking all the way up through the plant. And she said, if I turn this down, my career is shot. We're going to have to do this. And I went, but then again, okay, at least it's warmer than Neenah, Wisconsin. Not knowing anything about Tulsa, except for the fact that that's what my plane flew over when I was commuting either east or west, that was pretty much my only knowledge of Tulsa, Oklahoma. But see, column A, at least I'd be warmer. So, we did the house hunting thing. I made like 4 or 5 trips out to Tulsa for the realtor. Found a house we liked in a neighborhood we loved with a tornado shelter farther down the line that came in rather handy, especially an underground 20 by 20 foot room. I arrived on Jill was already there. She was in a corporate apartment because she had started working. I arrived I arrived the day before the moving van and pulled a blow up in the new house. The truck arrived on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I was so sick of looking at boxes I could scream. Decided I needed to get out of the house, and a friend of mine was there with us. So we took off driving, ended up at Oklahoma's largest country and western store, and I needed a new pair of boots. Ran into a salesman who ultimately became a club brother of mine, mostly because I said something about the red hanky in his back pocket. And he turned a shade of red that's seen in lobsters and in some gorgeous sunsets. I pretty much knew I had him, and we started a conversation. While, by the way, he was fitting me for my boots. And he said, there is a meeting that's going to happen on Sunday to see whether or not there's enough interest to form a leather group. Now, like I said, I got there on a Monday. On Sunday, Jill and I were charter members of the group that became TULSA. And once I began to meet my club brothers, because at that time we were the only women there, and Oklahoma was still very cloistered because AIDS hit the East Coast and the West Coast before it hit the Midwest. So we got to know some of our club brothers who were very loving to us because they were the men who were willing to come out and be in public, right kind of at the tail end of Tulsa's AIDS fear. And they said, let us show you around the town. And I'm thinking honky tonks, bad rodeos, and a whole lot of stuff that's going to make me crazy. Within 10 days, Jill and I never wanted to leave. Tulsa is still the city we call home. As much as I enjoy Evansville, Tulsa is still the patch on my patch vest. And we found out in less than a month just how amazing a community Tulsa, Oklahoma was. So
glad you mentioned your vest.
Shit, we're moving to Tulsa.
You said the same thing when you moved to Evansville.
Became, oh my God. Yeah, but see.
And then you turned
had
Evansville upside down too.
Yeah, well, they deserve it. If it were a choice of staying in Evansville and going back to Tulsa, assuming, because Tulsa's real estate has gone through the roof, assuming I could pick up everyone and everything just the way it is, I'd probably go home in a heartbeat.
So you went from New York and all that it has to offer to LA and all that it has to offer to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and within 3 days you had created 4 days what it had to offer. Of course.
It's what she does.
Gravity wells. I've mentioned those. I saw Kodiak earlier. Kodiak understands gravity wells. There he is. Yep. Yep.
So there are only 2 people willing to read an entry?
No. Shark.
Other than shit, I'm moving to Tulsa.
You know me. I made you laugh.
I have 2.
Uh-oh. Shar is.
I couldn't decide.
Shar is going to be teacher's pet. She has 2.
I have 2. 1988, October 5th was a Wednesday. Madam and I are off for Seattle. We're about to attend our first leather conference. Maybe I will find a lifestyle styler that I can talk to. I'm sure that must be someone there like me.
We were off to our first Living in Leather, put on by the National Leather, or the fledgling, because they were a very new organization, National Leather Association. And it was an adventure because while I had been on club runs, this was a very different, or it was to be a very different thing. And we were told to be there by one of the men that I call Big Brother, and that's Guy Baldwin. He said, you are coming to this conference and then next year you're presenting. And I went, sir, yes, sir. And that was the end of the conversation. And then went, whoops, don't do that. Jean went, sure, let's go.
Did you find someone like you?
Yes.
That's the story I want to hear.
I can't even remember her name now. Because I got to see her only 2 or 3 times a year, usually when we were at conferences. But there was another full-timer there, full-time slave, who was not slave and wife, who was a possession as I was. We laughed, we traded stories, most of which were pretty much the same. And it was good to have someone to talk to, because unless you live this way, the lifestyles of a part-timer and a full-timer are very different. The lifestyles of an old world full-timer and the youngins are very different. And the last time I had someone to talk to who was just like me, we were at, I was still training at House of Cards and could talk to Senior or the other slaves who were in my group, because this was the way we lived. It wasn't a lifestyle, it was life.
1991. I'm including the first sentence for reference. February 19th, so Tuesday. Why can't my owner see that I'm dying to play? I'm truly dying because we haven't played. The obvious is obvious to everyone but the person that I care about most, and the person who, after a decade, should know me better than anyone. I'm finding relief and release thinking about a stranger. Shit. The part that sang to me in that was the guilt that I just know you were piling on yourself, because I would have.
Yeah. My life with Jean and her husband, because of what he did for a living, kept me very busy. But I was, if any of you know horses, I was the plow horse to one of my slave sisters who was Jean's show Arab. So when we were all in public together, when Jean wanted attention, she was playing with my sister and not me. When things needed to be set up for scenes for her to do with my sister, that was my job. By the time she finished playing with her Arab, she was too tired for the plow horse. And that could go on for 6, 7, 8, 9 months at a time. But when you are maintaining the kind of schedules that I did, by way of explanation, good slaves make incredible personal assistants. And Jean's husband worked in the motion picture industry. And whenever they had a celebrity they either wanted to keep out of the director's hair because that person was a pain in the ass, or give extra benefits to that they couldn't exactly put in the contract, they got me for anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks. So between working a motion picture day, if I had to be on, which is 14 hours long before overtime, and still having to maintain my duties with my owner and my mate, my life was crazy. So it only left weekends or party time or whatever, but party time was not my time. And when the car isn't even running on fumes anymore, is running on its own prayer and motivation, you kind of wish somebody would put even a gallon in the gas tank.
Showie mentioned it's so much harder to do that on this side of a slash, meeting somebody like you. That's what that's referencing. And Duchess of LV asked, may I ask, what is the difference to you about it being life versus being lifestyle?
Okay. Lifestyle has certain other parameters in it. The fact that life can get in the way, or lifestyle, life can get in the way. With life, you just function around it. Had someone that I loved, for instance, died, and my owner said, you don't go, you don't go. Now the realities of the lifestyle put life and all of the bumps and bruises that go with it into the equation. Perhaps the difference is that the lifestyle is more human, and some would argue humane.
Do you disagree with that assessment that it would be more humane, or? is it something that you just, at the time you just dealt with it, so that's just what it was, but now thinking back at it, it would have been maybe better for your mental health, possibly?
That's a hard one. Because as I said, the life that I lived, my era, didn't have those parameters in it. Obedience and trust were the parameters. So the realities of the slave's life came third in a 2-horse race. My mental health wasn't a condition most of the time. My health wasn't a condition a lot of the time. And my fear of failure could overcome a lot of things.
Still does.
Life. Jean had a back problem. And had any one of a number of back surgeries. I slept on the floor under her hospital bed because I could get to her faster than her nurses could. If that bed creaked, I was up, out, and standing to look on her while she was sleeping to make sure there were no problems. That was just life. It wasn't even something I thought about. Neither did any of the other slaves of my era. It was just life. Now, if I were to tell someone that I was sleeping on a hospital floor, the questions would be, did you at least have a blanket and pillow? Never thought about it. The difference between life and lifestyle. Blanket and pillow is lifestyle.
Luxury.
Life was
right. That's what you do.
That's what you do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justice. I believe Zowie has another.
Yeah, I was flipping through my bookmarks here. There's several in this one. Every time I read it, I find another thing to put in. So moving up to the 1994.
Oh, for what this is worth, since we're going into a reprint, Ren Jackson said that I could use her real name, which is Mistress Mir.
I have one. I have one.
Go ahead.
Are you done with Are you done with talking about Mir Mom?
Zowie
had picked the year 94.
Okay.
And in 94, the book calls her, in 94, I was with Ren.
Yeah.
Ren's real name is Mir.
Pulse, do you mind? We'll let Zowie get this one.
Oh,
and then
yes, sir.
I'll go to you
I
next.
I didn't know if she was done or not. I'll
No
wait.
worries. Thank you.
Saturday, I spent the day in Oklahoma City judging the Miss Oklahoma Leather Contest. Of the 3 candidates, one wasn't even a serious contender. The other 2 could best be defined as equals and opposites. Mist, the more outgoing of the 2, has a radiant personality, good leather history behind her, and lousy interview skills. Raina is more introspective, but without the vivaciousness Mist possesses. She also lacks Mist dynamicism, but she is fast on her feet and interviews well. Today's choices were not easy. I wish I could roll the 2 into one ball or sash, both, and make them work together. Now, being someone who didn't come on the contest scene until 20 teens, how has it changed? What was it like then? How has it changed now, or has it?
How has it changed? What was it like then? Let's back up to that. There were not that, for one thing, there weren't that many contests. From bar to city to state to region to Mr. or Miss. That was the contest track. But the title holder had very specific responsibilities. If you were representing, if you held a bar title, Mr. or Miss, you were expected to be at your bar every weekend, greeting the newcomers, being there and being present, either in your sash or in your vest, going to events outside of the bar, representing the bar and telling people about, hi, this is my home. I am Ms. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so. When you went on to city or state, the expectations were pretty much the same, especially for the state, because you were representing the great state of Oklahoma, and we took that very seriously. You were expected to be out in the real world, representing the leathermen and women of your state. Not only were you expected to be at the usual track events, whether they be other contests or other bar runs, etc. You were also expected to actively be reaching out to the Rotary and the Elks and the police, and wearing that sash, not necessarily like at the grocery store, but to reach out to other organizations to make contacts. Hi, this is who we are. We are not that scary, etc. The contest circuit is much, much broader now. And the requirements for title holders are very, very different than they were when I was actively judging contests from about 82 up to the mid 2000s. I've watched more titles emerge. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. Not my era, so to speak, to judge. The reasons for contests vary with every producer. What they expect varies. Their job is to convey those expectations to their judging panel so that they can find the person who matches that set of expectations. I have found, and this is my humble opinion only, so don't shoot me, that far too many contests in the last 10 to 15 years are held for the reason to hold the contest, partially because it's profitable, partially because it will draw out enough men and women, friendly folk, because I am old and I have to watch my pronouns. It will draw out enough people to be a part of a larger event, some of which is purely socializing, and that's wonderful. The new generations are asking whether or not the contest circuit is even needed anymore, because the requirements for the title holder have changed. I honestly don't know, because I don't know how to answer that question. As I said, the eras were very different.
Bear and Bella have a question. Go ahead.
So I was actually just going to ask that question. I was Miss San Diego Leather 98, 99, and have become somewhat jaded on the contest circuit, to say the least. A few years ago, I judged the Mr. and Ms. San Diego contest, and so I won't ask the question that you just answered, but I did ask a contestant what purpose contests currently hold, because they are different for me, 25 years into the scene. They are different, and I recognize I come from a different era as well. And he actually gave an answer that I didn't know I was looking for. And he talked about he sees the contests as a place for us to gather. It is now a place where, in large, at least in San Diego and in his experience, and I can see this as well, it is one of the few common places we have as a community. Again, this is regional, as a community, to come together and see people. There are people I only see at contests nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
That there's so while I'm not necessarily a fan for contests for contest's sake, I can see where there's value, particularly to a newer generation, to have a place to meet once a year, an annual gathering. It just gave me a different perspective. I'm not sure that I'm still a fan of the circuits, but that's a personal opinion and a personal preference.
I want to thank you for giving me a nice way to say that. I'm a little jaded about the whole contest thing. That's nice. Should we do the if you're a title holder applaud and see how many title holders are in the room? Let me see if I can find that. If you are a title holder, if I could find reactions, there they are. If you are a title holder, please applaud. Okay, so not everybody in the room.
Which to some extent is nice. I was at an event once, and I'm going back almost 20 years. Judy Tolling was emceeing, and of course they were getting ready for the Parade of Colors, and they were putting in the stipulations of what years you had to fall into. And then finally, she said, turn up the lights, and they turned up the lights. And there were about 450 people there. And she said, will everyone who has ever held a title raise your hand? And then she said, no, wrong way to do it. Well, everyone who has never held a title, raise your hand. Out of all of those people, one hand went up. Mine. Because there were that many title holders in that room, and we're talking over 400.
That's the story that made me say, should we ask how many are in the room? Shy, just a second. Scott's up. I'll get you next. Go ahead, Scott.
Just to kind of add a little bit of Northeast perspective, and a lot of the leather clubs from the 70s would do a run and they would do a title. And it was kind of like you were king of the orgy.
Mm-hmm.
And then when AIDS and HIV came along, we became in crisis mode. And this is when a lot of the title holders began doing fundraisers and doing things in order to organize around helping people. And so that there was a big change. Within the Northeast, once the AIDS cocktail comes along and people aren't dying anymore, the fundraising aspect didn't stop. You then started raising money for three-legged cats.
Right.
And then as time went on, people stopped going to the bars. In Boston, that's when the smoking ban took place, and suddenly the place you heard an echo. And so when you had a contest, people would come out. Having had one foot in the pansexual community, being part of the New England Leather Alliance and being part of the men's community, one of the things that I often compare both communities, I often say, when the pansexuals don't know what to do with their hands, they have a class. When gay men don't know what to do, they either have a contest or a fundraiser, A+ if it's a contest that's a fundraiser.
So true.
That's all.
I used to sum it up with the mineshaft stuff. You know, basically it used to be who's the hottest guy in the bar.
We used to call that slut of the run, by the way.
Right.
It's actually also pig of the run.
Big of a run. Yep.
Pig of the run. And my my club brother Jonathan at the Empire City MC's 50th anniversary in New York, he got Mr. Congeniality, which is basically the same thing. But
You all.
yeah, it just sounds far more polite.
Very Boston of you, actually.
No, this was New York. That was New York. That's what they
You all
named.
rubbed off.
Joey, apologies. I've been on gallery view and didn't realize you were still the spotlight. Sorry. Shy, go ahead.
I just want to interject my opinion about contests. I've been to several to watch, and they're an amazing thing. And when you're trying to explain to people what leather is and why you're a part of leather, it's really hard to explain unless you're there. The feel of all the people together and that camaraderie, I mean, that leather people have. We always encourage people in our community to try to go and watch a contest, try to go to a leather fest, and just watch, just see how it happens. Not to mention how hot the 24-hour dungeons are. Yeah, in our area in Kansas City and Oklahoma, they usually have a 24-hour dungeon set up. I know it's not always that way all around, but it's something else to be a part of.
Oh, thanks, Shy.
Now, Pulse, I'm real curious about what you would have want to be reading. Or should I be nervous?
Maybe just a little bit.
Give me 2 seconds. I'm sorry. Wayward
Yeah, go
Soul
ahead.
added.
Oh, me bad.
I was a judge recently, and heck, we only even had one entrant in each category. It wasn't a rubber stamping by any means, but it wasn't much of a competition either. And then Moggy Rose says it's an ordeal running for a contest in my humble opinion. All right, Pulse.
I want to touch on a couple of things that Mom was talking about and tie it into my question, because she mentioned mental health right after they were talking about life and your lifestyle. Having been through several evolutions, I've watched her strain her mental health to the breaking point. It didn't break, but I watched her stress it to that limit. And I'm not going to go into detail, but I've watched her go to the edge. And that life versus lifestyle thing, she was still in that mode of life, whereas everybody else goes, well, life will change your, and I say it all the time, life will change your lifestyle. In her case, they didn't have the option. All that being said, I'm going to say 2 words along with mental health. Black Mercedes.
Green, actually.
Oh, okay.
Oh, all right. I've got to clean this story up a bit.
Pulse gets the best face award.
Because Matt, this has something to do with the question you had asked me off screen about that Mercedes. Making story that could still get me into trouble. Very short. There was a very kinky mafia don who thought that I should serve him in exchange for a gift to Catherine that there is almost no way to put this. How many people here have read Exit to Eden by Anne Rice? Okay. For what it's worth to you, that island did exist. And the woman who, the dominants, who were mistresses of the island, were given a 1-year contract with a possibility for a 1-year extension. After that, you know, halfway into your extension, they were looking for your replacement. The opportunity to be that replacement was offered to Catherine. Yeah. It involved a whole lot of spoiling, a whole lot of pampering, a whole lot of money, a bottomless credit card, and a whole bunch of other things to deal with those who could afford that lifestyle. And all she had to do was give the man who had control of that island me for a year, while she was playing footloose and fancy free to people with more money than brains. I got to serve him and his wife and be nanny to his children. Catherine didn't know what to say because while she was the leaseholder of sorts, Jill was the owner. Jill said, not just no, but hell no. But when you have an awful lot of money and an awful lot of power, no is I just haven't convinced you yet. And so there was a green Mercedes that was very much out of place in my neighborhood. That was there for days on end. The first time I had no idea because the house was right across the street from a little bodega. Right next to that was my mechanic who came into play with that story because Rob was built like the broadside of a Sherman tank. And I went across the street to get something. Can't even remember what the hell it was. As I was coming out of the store, 3 gorillas came out of that car faster than I had ever seen anything move in my life and tried to shove me into it. Rob came out and he was probably in his late 50s or early 60s then. This man was an easy 280, well over 6 foot, and could probably have taken down the entire center line for the Green Bay Packers. Grabbed both of these guys, and as he's fighting them off of me, he said, run. I took off back across the street and up on the porch while he folded, spindled, and mutilated these boys and shoved them back into the car. Car showed up every day for a very long time. Until finally someone with more power than the person who directed the 3 goons in the Mercedes had that stopped it for me. And that's probably as sanitized as I can make it.
I watched, as I was doing this, I watched how strained you were during that period and how relieved you were when it was over. So it was the question, because I read it several times because I'm like, okay, I need the blanks filled in because we've talked about it a little and
yeah, but you read it from here.
Yes, ma'am.
that gives you a very different perspective
I have a different perspective anyway.
on that story.
Yeah.
That was why I brought it up, because it's mentioned several times, but you never get any info on it. So it's kind of like the side story, the side plot that was never resolved.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I was actually quite surprised they left in. Story about how the journal came to become a book. Philip Miller and Molly Devon are probably before the era of most of you. There were the two people who wrote Screw the Roses, Send Me the Thorns, and owned Mystic Rose Press. They published my first book. They found out that I kept a journal, mostly because a copy of it was at the Moser Institute. Long story. And they cornered me one day at an event and started asking me about it. And I said, well, when I got over the initial shock, because Philip Miller the man was ginormous, and looking down at me very easily with these probably 12 to 13 inches between us. And after directing him to my owner, because it's like, you don't want to do this, really. It's a waste of money. They said, you owe it to history to let us publish this. Well, at the time, I was on the board of directors of the Leather Archives and Museum, and they pretty much knew they had bit me over no lube.
That was pretty much cheating.
No lube, just hi. Here it goes. So at that point in time, a dear friend had been transposing. By the way, there are 3 of these. So what was published is about probably half of it. And we were transposing it onto 5-inch floppies, just so that there could be a full copy of it, except for the things that couldn't be added because they couldn't be Xeroxed. And I handed over the disc, or I was about to hand over the discs. He said, can you edit this? I said, sure. And I grabbed the 5-inch floppies and aimed them at the garbage can and opened my hands. I didn't know a mountain could move that quickly, because Philip grabbed those discs in midair and went, I guess you can't. You'd be right about that. Mostly because how the hell do you edit your own life? I have no idea, actually, until tonight, what anybody would find interesting. So all of that comes down to, when it first came out, the first time I saw what had been published was the day I got the first box of books. I had no idea what had been left in, no idea what had been taken out. And since I didn't do the edit or the spell check, by the way, so don't yell at me for the spelling, although Shar has managed to clean a lot of that up.
That's been cleaned up.
We're gonna fix that. Yeah.
Some of the things that were left in horrified me. But then again, there are things in those books I wouldn't tell a psychiatrist. Some of the things that got taken out also surprised me. So the story of that Mercedes and everything that went behind it had to be taken out of the original book because, the person that came after me was a mafia don. And his 3 little girls, who looked like the Gerber babies at 4, 6, and 8, decided that they wanted me as their new nanny. And whatever his daughters wanted, his daughters got. And the kinky part was on top of it. But especially the youngest, who just thought that I was something between Mary Poppins and a big brown teddy bear. Is she going, I remember her getting out of the Rolls Royce that we were in the back seat of, and her scrambling across my lap because she'd been sitting in my lap. Is she going to be my new nanny daddy? And within about 15 minutes of actually thinking about that statement, I realized that I didn't have a collar around my neck, I had a noose. So that's why a lot of the backstory didn't make it.
Right. And shall we just answer your question of, can you give us an example of, well, can you give us an example of what surprised you was taken out?
Some of the early entries about training at the club, at House of Cards, training entries, the fun of talking to other slaves, the joy of, and some of the reactions to actually being the kinkling on a leather Mount Olympus and being on panels with the people, even though a lot of them were very good friends, were also my idols. And what the hell am I doing sitting here? You know, peasants don't live with the gods, much less have conversations with them. And I didn't get thrown off Mount Olympus. Some of those are there. To some extent, it's easier to say what was left in that surprised me. My mother's death is in the journal. One of my, when you come from a big family, you are going to go to a lot of funerals as well as a lot of weddings. You're also going to hold a lot of infants, and that's all part of the joy of big family. But 2 deaths are in here that I'm surprised were left in. My cocaine addiction was left in. I expected it to, in the 2020 clarity of hindsight, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, and I've never thought about it before, I guess I expected it to be less real and a little bit more of just the fairy tale positive. I figured they would take, you know, because Molly always said a lot of it she found highly erotic, which I think is probably my writing style because I write the way I speak. I expected about 150 entries that someone might find erotic. The idea that a lot of the day-to-day got left in actually still surprises me.
I think that's probably what connects people to the book. It's the day-to-day.
The day-to-day is, some of the day-to-day is powerful. A lot of it.
Yeah, I mean, Story of O is a fantasy. I think that's what makes this book connect with people.
Yeah, this is real stuff.
Right.
The day-to-day and the doubts that you had about yourself and if you were serving at the level you needed to be. That's why I reread this all the time, because those speak to me so deeply. If they'd have written another fantasy, don't get me wrong, I love my fantasy novels, but I got plenty of those already.
Well, not exactly fantasy, shall we, but more of the erotic. There's of all of the memories that come flooding back when I think about this, 2 are playing through. one of which had to do with someone who, while we wanted to call it mistress and servant, was more I wanted more. I knew I wasn't going to get it, but the person that I was playing with was hot as hell in terms of play. And when you deal with someone who's a little crazy, the play tends to be really exciting. She couldn't handle my reputation. And it was my reputation at that point that ultimately came between us. And there's an entry in the journal about it because we were at an event and people needed to speak to me because this was the business of the event. And I had to constantly say, please, ma'am, I need you to excuse me. I have work to do. And that was an understanding going to the event. But it became so consistent that by the end of the second day, she was at my throat and trying to manipulate situations so that I couldn't be present to have someone need me for something. And the other one, which is a situation of, I could call it muscle memory, but it's one of those things that I think that only a lifestyle slave would understand. My owner wore a very distinctive perfume, or one of them wore a very distinctive perfume. And I was in Beverly Hills picking something up. And I realized, and her scent walked, the person that I thought was my mistress walked past me because the perfume went past me. And I was 2/3 of the way down the block trying to catch up with her before I realized, jackass, what are you doing? She's in New York. And I was so conditioned to follow the scent and had never smelled it on anyone else that when her perfume went by, I said, I'll be back. I was out the door and down the street. And it was a conditioned response. Fuck, she's leaving. I gotta go. And those were the kinds of things that I didn't think anybody would care about. Therefore, what the hell are they doing in the book? You know, I expected, you know, because Molly had probably 20 or 30 of her favorite readings, most of which happened in the last 3 years with Mir. And I thought whatever they chose would be more like that.
Wayward Soul says the day-to-day is what makes it real. Boot Black Amber nailed it. They kept the life in it instead of stripping it down to the lifestyle. Well done, Amber. Nice Kitty says the rawness is what makes it truly erotic. Zowie says I've been in service too long to expect it to all be erotic. LOL. Shar, go ahead.
When I was fooling around with it, the thing that caught me is that whoever had edited the book. Now, I've heard some of the backstories. I have not read the journals. I didn't know you still had them on hand. Somebody hid that from me, but I know now. And I'll be there in October.
Actually, they have been scanned. Between Pulse and Cece, they have the scan. The entire journal has been scanned.
But when I was reading it, what I felt
And it
was
fills in the
left
gaps.
out was the trip to becoming. All of the early things that I would have been looking for.
And
were
the
what was
problem,
left out.
Shar, is that so much of that, most of that actually started before I kept a journal. Now, there is a very small one, and I don't even know if it still exists. There are two, actually. One was when I was a student. And the other one is some of my early notes from House of Cards. But I was at House of Cards in 77, 78, and off and on in 79. Stop, back up, put a plug in it.
What had happened was,
What did happen was.
There was a club place versus Patch Club or the leather nightclubs that New York was famous for. There was a high rollers play den. 87th, uptown New York. And remembering that the scene was much smaller then and very segmented because everybody had something to lose, jobs, children, and so on. The place was called House of Cards. And it had 52 members and a lot of associates, and each member corresponded to a playing card. But their brownstone, their clubhouse, so to speak, had a room in the basement of the brownstone that no master could enter. You enter that instead of sending a slave into that room. You lose your membership, period. And
mute, somebody please mute.
a lot of my early training, formal training, happened at House of Cards. And that was before I was told to keep that monster. Some of it you've heard me talk about. Some of it I have taught to other slaves in weekend intensives and things like that. But most of that happened before I started keeping that journal, because the journal didn't start until 80. And I had already been, Jill and I came out in 73 and 74, found Tess in the very early 74. And because of the anomaly that we were, because we were a female to female couple, which was very unusual in New York, and we were a Black female to female couple, with a slave who was very well behaved. And that got us a lot of invitations to places that under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have had a pipe dream about House of Cards because I never would have known it existed.
Kodiak had a hand up.
Yeah, I'm a little late on this, but I saw how everybody is reading excerpts from the book, and I'm realizing I don't know how to get a copy of that. So, and
Which book is that? This one?
Well, that and the
yes,
original journal
and
too.
the original journal,
The expanded journal.
The reason we are doing this particular Librarian Speaks is because we are a week or two away from a refresh reprint of this book being available for all of you.
Thank God, because it's like between $150 and $600 online right now. I'm dying.
It's come down, Moon.
We were
yeah, what was it, 3,000?
The highest one I've ever seen was 1,300.
We were in a Zoom
I thought it was
years ago.
Oh,
And Mama mentioned the book, and a participant in the Zoom went to Amazon, found it, and paid $2 something for it. To which I advised them to please send it to Mama to be signed, and I believe that got taken care of.
Yeah.
So that's the point of us getting it reprinted, is so that everybody has access to it. And what I'm thinking about doing is we will get it available, give it 3 to 6 months, and then do this again with all the new folks that have the book.
Yeah,
I mean, we'd love to put it in a library out here.
Yes, sir.
And
the reprint is a stopgap because as I was digging Pulse's grave and Stacey's as well, my youngins have found things that I forgot I had. They found my old picture boxes. They found my old certificates. Then they went running off with a sound system and interviewed Mir over the last 3 years of the book. So there are some stories from the other side.
Yeah.
And they want to do the equivalent of a tabletop with a complete re-edit, along with photographs, certificates, probably newspaper articles. I have no idea what Pulse and Cece have up their sleeve, because Cece will not let me hear the interview with Mir. And Mir, every time I ask her, just laughs.
Gotta love sadists.
And, you know, all I can think of is, now, as much as we laugh with each other, talk with each other, as much as we have done interviews together, there's a little, you know, the demon that sits on one shoulder and the angel on the other. The little demon is going, you're fucked. You're fucked. You're fucked. You're really fucked. They're up to something and you know you're fucked. And, you know, my prayer is it'll take way too long until it comes out into that coffee table monster.
A coffee table with a picture like this
has all of my life in it and the ability, you know, I'll be too old to care and I'll just go, I won't have them, so that I won't remember anything that's in there. Please.
Mama, we're a little over time. Is that okay?
Sure.
Great. Boot Bear and Bella?
I had plenty of coffee. God help me.
And I've had a rock star and I'm on California time, so you know.
Wait, who needs coffee? Are you in Colorado?
So on the topic of this new release, are you also planning on doing, this is a two-part question, are you also planning on doing audio version?
That's what you guys were supposed to do.
Well, here's the, I mean, like, this is what I thought in you sharing about, you know,
the short
when we're
answer is
talking
yes.
about the stories having the feelings that you talk about in the journals having universal, they're universal. And I'm always a fan of hearing the author as the audio for any book. That's my personal preference. But then as people were reading, I was like, oh, it'd be kind of amazing to have like maybe a little intro from you, but then have all these layered voices doing different stories to kind of hone in on that universal experience that we often have in this life.
It's a project.
That's her dream.
The example I gave for Mama was Hitchhiker's Trilogy being read by Douglas Adams just makes it complete. Hearing all the emphasis the way he did it. That was what I used for Mama as an example.
Yeah.
I think part of it is because although I like my singing voice, even though I've done a lot of damage to my vocal cords, I don't particularly like my speaking voice.
But that's part of the record. It doesn't have to be the whole thing.
We have to preserve it for leather history, Mama.
That's correct. Yeah.
And your speaking voice is very distinctive. That was proof at MSC because the entire audience was hanging on your video.
And Mama Vi, your raspy voice is sexy as hell.
5 years ago, 6 years ago, I might have thought about it. As I said, I have done all kinds of horrible damage to my vocal cords. But
just so y'all know, I'm the nag in her group, and I will keep at her. I can make no promises because I got to catch her at the right thing.
And you,
but if it can get done, it will get done.
That would be so amazing to have that in history. I mean, you are such a history buff, Mama Vi, and if you would even begin to understand how important
the news.
If Tony DeBlas could read his book to you,
right?
Would you want it?
Bam, yes.
And If I may also add something in here.
Evil invoking dead.
Mama, I met you in, what was it, September of 2004. I was still Mr. Boston, and I was still at the beginnings of me doing a lot of public speaking. And when you sat and you did all of the books and everything like that, the way that you were speaking, I watched it, and it was so clear and so concise that when it came to the point of me being able to public speak, I tried to emulate you. That's one part. The other part is that and being a person that has such a love affair with books, this is probably going to seem sacrilege to you, but I hate to read. And the reason why I hate to read is because I have a comprehension learning disability, whether or not you realize that or not. So audiobooks are my friend.
Bradford.
And I
no
am,
book
I'll
will
tag on
ever
that.
come across as powerfully as it will by the author. All of this tonight was awesome and powerful, but it was powerful for a different reason. It was powerful because you can hear where these lovely people put those emphasis in where they believe, and you could feel their feelings coming through.
Yes.
Right.
But what we don't have, Mama Vi, and what we will never have if you do not give it to us, is your feelings coming through with your words and your power and your history. And I'll ask you again, if you could hear Tony DeBlas read his book to you, would you want that or somebody else?
You guys are playing dirty tonight.
I told you, I am the nag. I will play dirty. I will hit every sore spot I can find.
This is the time to play dirty.
I want these things.
And you can't lose your voice until I get to play ingenue.
So voting? Are we taking a vote?
Is
there part of this
one at a time
is online because Cece has been reading bits and pieces of it. I think she's through like the first 2 years.
And one of the other things to keep in mind, Mama, is while you may hear your voice and hear only the deterioration of what it used to be, we hear the voice of someone we love.
Yes.
We hear the voice we love sharing their truth.
We hear Grandma's voice.
Right.
You know, I hear the voice of my speaking mentor.
Grandma reading the exploits of her younger self.
Like the story of Oak is fiction, but this is like reality, and this is something that I can actually grasp and have that is real. So it validates me in so many ways. You know, you, Slade, Patricia, all my other friends, you know, it's kind of important.
There are some entries I'm not even sure I can get through.
We'll take the tears too. You can do it.
Well,
Get the
most
giggles.
because yeah, there's those. The mind fills in the other parts.
We'll just do the bloopers at the end.
That's what editing's for.
We have editors and editing programs and time. I got a lot of time.
For instance, the book fell open and I stuck a bookmark in it. Before I can even read this, I'm going to ask you, how many people know Mistress Muir or have heard of her or seen pictures of her?
Oh, I've heard of her. I'd love to meet her.
I've seen those damn pictures.
She's a stunningly beautiful woman.
She is.
And 20 some odd years ago, when this particular journal entry happened, for a woman whose name means peace, you create erotic chaos wherever you go. The silk pantsuit you wore in 90-degree heat had men driving golf carts into the sides of buildings. I find that amusing. Your appearance in a lesbian bar made women slap their lovers to maintain proper attention. So what else is new? Your long legs encased in black leather gave gay male friends of mine hard-ons. Quite interesting. However, you're turning on a vacuum cleaner and using it on my living room rug while I was dusting furniture is going to take serious getting used to. Hadn't I even told you dominants don't do that sort of thing? I know. I've talked to tops all over the world, and I can't remember many who are familiar with the work concept. You understand the work you give your slaves, and you're right there beside them. When no one is available, you'll do it yourself. This is going to take getting used to. Mind you, I didn't say I didn't like it. I just don't know how to handle it. In my 20 years, jaded as I am, this is a real novelty. I want to sit you down, hand you a drink, and do the mundane myself. Even though you are right about many hands making the load lighter and faster. Forgive me for not knowing how to react to this side of you. Forgive me for wishing to coddle you. Forgive me for treating you like every other dominant. You're something special, and I've known that for 15 years.
She is that. And that's why you have to read your book.
Right there. That.
The problem is there are so many things I wish I could tell you.
I could listen to that all day.
Behind this.
I mean, you're allowed to do that, right? On audio, on an audio.
On audio, you
Why
can do
wouldn't
that.
You can do whatever you want.
It's your audio book.
Here's what we'll do is you'll just read the book and you'll do whatever you're going to do. We will edit it down to the book as the book copy, and then we will do the director's cut.
Yes.
It'll be like
Yes.
it'll be like a Pixar movie. At the end, we have all the funny bits.
We can have the mama cut.
The mama cut.
The entry that I just
the grandma's house cut.
Hang on.
Related to two different things. Now, first of all, the word mir is Russian for peace. And I've always teased her about that. One time when she came to visit, one of my club brothers, who is the head horticulturalist for the Tulsa Zoo, said, I'm going to send one of, come on this day, I'm going to give you a back tour of the zoo that people don't see. Now, for those of you who have worn silk, you know, if it gets wet, it damn near goes translucent. I need you to picture taupe brown silk on brown skin in 94-degree heat. So we're standing at the entrance, we're waiting for the golf cart that we knew was coming. And I can see the cart. And it's getting closer and closer, and the guy's driving like this. And have you ever been in a position where you can watch a train wreck in slow motion and you know what's going to happen? So he's driving like this until he hit a telephone pole, sent the thing back on its rear. So I need you to imagine a picture of a golf cart propped vertically against a telephone pole. He crawled out, and I'm laughing my ass off. And Mira's more concerned with, is this guy okay? I was laughing so hard, I really thought I was going to wet myself. So he pulls the cart back down, thing's still running, little golf cart's wheels are still going. Pulls the thing back down, turns the keys off, brushes it off, straightens himself out, and says that he's here to pick us up. Mir was completely oblivious to what was going on. It tickled me. We were in, and I had set up a situation to have a friend of mine take her to one of my favorite dyke bars. And so Marty had taken Mir there, and I was already there sitting at the bar, talking to the owner and laughing, and Paula knew I was up to something, because very rarely do I sit at the bar. And Marty walks in with Mir, and they sit down, and she's looking like every cowgirl's wet dream. And black leather pants, boots, tight black fringe jacket, cowboy hat. She sits down and I'm watching everything that's going on in the pool room. And she's talking to Marty, and this cute little dyke is trying to shoot pool while looking over her shoulder until her lover clocked her in the back of the head with a cue stick. And Mira's just talking to Marty, absolutely oblivious to, you know, the fights that are going on all around her as people are struggling to buy her drinks. And ultimately a fight broke out in the bathroom that we could hear all the way to the front until Paula said, "You have got to stop this before they tear my bar to pieces." So finally I picked up a drink, slid over and, you know, very gently moved Marty out of the way and, you know, like we didn't know each other. "Hi, my name is. Would you like to go for a cup of coffee? I'd love to take you to dinner." And sounds fabulous. So I took her by the arm and took her out of the bar. 2 days later, Paula threatened to send me the bill for the Mir never noticed. Now I'm dying to hear that story from the other side. But things like that are the backstory to that entry. I still remember what she looked like in taupe leather. I still remember the look on that guy's face when he realized he had hit a pole and kept going and drove straight into it. I even remember the little dyke at the bar who saddled up to me, sat down and said, "I'm going home with that." I think about half the women in this bar think they're going home with that. And we laughed about it, and I just kept drinking my Coke. And those are the stories, those are the memories that the entry doesn't talk about.
I love that story. Every time she tells that story, I love that story.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, my life. Jesus.
Well, I want to thank everyone personally from the bottom of my heart for doing what we haven't been able to do and convince her of all these things we have been telling her all these years. The audiobook, the book in general, the expanded version, etc., etc.
The interest in it that you are also oblivious to, Mom, because those I've told you stories about people that circulate around you that you're oblivious to. You're almost as bad as Mir, almost.
Okay.
Almost. Okay, can I tell real? I'm gonna make a Reader's Digest version of a story before you shut down, sir.
Oh, we're not going anywhere. There's an after party.
Okay. There was a conference called Black Bee, and it was held in Arundel Mills. And Mom had been going 12 on a scale of 10 for a minute, and we had been pushing it. And she was stressed to that edge that we spoke of earlier. So at the conference, Mir shows up. Now, she shows up out of ether, pick one, and says, "Come on, let's go." Takes Mom off, takes her to dinner, and then they proceed later on in the evening to play and do their thing. Okay, this is like that evening. Next morning, I'm stumbling down the hallway at the hotel. I'm half in sweats and a t-shirt. I don't have anything on, but did I have shoes on? I don't remember. But anyway, I'm stumbling towards the coffee pot, and gliding down the hallway comes Mom. All of the stress that she had had on her face the day before was gone. And she says, "Coffee." I said, "Mom, I haven't gone." She said, "No, coffee." Anybody who knows Mom, when she says coffee, she's talking Starbucks. Starbucks is about 2 miles away. Piles me into the van, into the Jeep, and we drive to Starbucks, go get coffee, and we're sitting out front because the inside is full. We're sitting at the little tables they have out front. And she proceeds to relay part of her previous evening. Now, part of the evening was knife play, where Mir had very gently drawn a line up Mom's chest and said, I could kill you now, should I? And then continued on up her chin. Okay, now she's telling me this over morning coffee. Now, we're both oblivious to the rest of us, but there's a gentleman sitting just to my right, and he had been reading his newspaper until he started listening to what we were talking about. Newspaper went down, and he's trying to hide behind his cup of coffee as he's drinking it. And when she tells me about the knife coming up her chin, and by then he's lost everything. He's staring at us because I look over at him. He doesn't even realize I'm watching it. Okay. And she says, yeah. And she drew a line. I says, yes, I believe you because you're still bleeding. And I handed her a napkin and the man dropped his coffee.
I didn't notice him.
Not tonight. One night I'm going to have to get her to tell the stories of Jasper, George.
Which one?
Just the you running around town, making everybody thinking a certain institution was back.
Oh, what?
Not tonight, not tonight, not tonight.
Well, they were
I'm
thinking
teasing.
it was the Confederacy had come back and somebody missed it.
That part. We're going to tell those stories one day.
Those are some of my favorite stories because I've been to Jasper and I can see it.
We were there a lot as it was happening. Yeah, that's why it's so funny.
I can see it.
All right, folks. I believe we've reached the point in time where we send Mama to bed and then we all talk about her after she's gone.
Actually, I don't have to sign on until midnight. We have for those who have been in my home know that I meditate heavily twice a day. I'm on a healing team, and that's another story. And tonight we have two that will be sending healing energy for, and I don't have to sign on till midnight. Now, if you're trying to get rid of me, I don't have a problem going.
No, you can come to the after party.
But and I more than likely should charge my phone just for shits and giggles. And I get to say thank you, because this is a treat that I never thought I would get. As I said, I spent a whole lot of time shoving things into the journal so that I could get it out of my system and close it. I've been told how it has affected people, and there have been 1,000 different ways. But seeing it written is one thing. Hearing someone else's inflections gives you a different perspective on your own life. So, thank you.
I'm going to go to gallery view. Mama, if you're on gallery view, please. I would like for everyone to pop in a reaction of any sort if you would like to do this again once the book has been out for a while and everybody can participate again. How many people would like to see this again? Any kind of reaction at all? That's almost everybody in the room.
When you'll probably have a lot more questions.
All right, Mama, I'm going to end the official Librarian Speaks.